Good morning, everyone. My name is Deborah Creedy, and I'm on contract with the South Dakota Department of Education as the state E-rate coordinator. With me today from the state is also Michelle Kronberg. She is an accountant and the E-rate administrator for the state, and she oversees my work. She's with the Department of Education. Also with the Department of Education, working with libraries as a technology specialist is Cheyenne Chantos. And so welcome to both of these ladies. Today's presentation is for training purposes for the upcoming E-rate funding year, which is called Funding Year 2022. And so that's the year that you would start receiving funds beginning July 1, 2022 for what's called Category 1 services and possibly equipment under Category 1. For Category 2, you can order the equipment and receive it beginning April 1, 2022. So you've got 3 extra months on the front end, and you can also receive and install the equipment up to September 30th, 2023. So you have 18 months to order and install Category 2 equipment, whereas you would receive your Category 1 equipment and service for beginning July 1, 2022. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen, and we're going to go into the USAC training portal, which models the current funding year 2022 Form 470, but it has not yet been updated for the Form 471. That update in the training site will occur once the filing period, called the filing window, opens in January of 2022 to file your Form 471 application for funding. So let's see if I can get us into the right screen. Got to get rid of my captions. Can you see the screen that is the URL says, let's see, the portal for training? Do you see that screen? Can someone let me know, or are you still seeing the Zoom screen?
We're
We
seeing the
see
web page.
Yeah, we see it.
Okay, great. So again, notice this says training. By the way, anyone can get a training account and go in and practice filing the forms if you'd like. You would just, I would do a Google website's URL search, Google search or whatever browser you use for USAC E-rate training portal. And I think that page would come up, and you can request to get your own account and go in and practice yourself. So we are at what's called the landing page, and that's the page from which you would start to file any of your forms. So what I have here is I always click on this hyperlink for the build entity, and that takes me to a menu option, and you see those 3 little dots, they're called ellipses. And when I click on those dots, it says create Form 470. That now takes me to a live Form 470 that I can start to complete. So you'll notice as I go through some of these screens, some of the information is hard-coded, and if the information is incorrect, then you would need to contact the Client Service Bureau that the E-rate program uses to request a correction to that hard-coded data. So for example, if your entity name or address was incorrectly listed here, you would need to contact them and ask them to correct it, or you could go in and change this information through your profile, your entity profiles, which are open right now and can be corrected. Those profiles will be locked down, and you won't be able to make any changes once the 470 filing window opens. So they lock down that data, they keep it constant, so that that opportunity to correct that data will end just a few days before the 471 window opens, so that that information will remain static. If you wanted to change that data, it would be a different process, which I can show you at the end of this demo, but I don't want to run out of time to do the 470 demo and the 471. So I'm going to do an application nickname. And this is a name that's going to be meaningful to the applicant. They don't care what you call it. So you could do just about anything here. That's the only information for that first screen. The next screen, all of this information is hard-coded. So if any of this is incorrect, I would either need to change my entity profile or I would need to contact the Client Service Bureau to get it corrected. So you select Save and Continue there. Note, this Save and Share button is a little misleading. What it means is that if you share this form, you actually lose control of completing it, and the form is basically assigned to all of the other registered users in your Epic account. They would receive it as a task that they would then be assigned to them, that they would then complete the form. So the only time I suggest using Save and Share is if you really do want to assign the form to have somebody else finish it because you're unable to. Typically, the person who starts the form is usually identified as the main contact person. So this means the correspondence, which is done electronically, would be sent to this person. So I'm going to select yes. If I select no, then I would have the opportunity to select any of the other registered users in this Epic account, and they would be identified as the contact person. So I'm going to select Save and Continue again. And now we get to the screen where it asks which kinds of service requests do you want to make. So this is the opportunity to request bids or price quotes from vendors. Category 1 is data transmission or internet access, and Category 2 has the 3 subcategories listed, which is the internal connections, basic maintenance, and managed internal broadband services. Those are services and equipment that go inside your buildings to facilitate delivery of internet to classrooms or to library patrons in the case of a library. Category 1, the data transmission and internet, that's the service that you're getting basically from the public networks or private networks that are being delivered to your building, and then they terminate at a point inside your building. So for this demonstration, we're going to demonstrate both Category 1 and Category 2, and we're going to save and continue. Here it asks, do you have an RFP? So if you have any supplemental document, anything at all, you want to share with bidders or prospective bidders, you would need to have that information prepared in a standalone document before you would start this form, and you would need to upload it. If you end up filing your 471 and certifying it and then deciding to release an RFP, you would need to start all over again because it would be considered a competitive bidding violation that you didn't upload your RFP document as part of your Form 470. If you select yes, then you would be required to upload the document, which is basically done through the upload process, which you can click on here, and that's going to take you to your computer files, or you can drag and drop, which is what I'm going to choose. So let's pretend this is the 470 RFP. I would just take, drag, and drop that file right there. Notice you can drag and drop multiple files. So then what you would do is save and continue. Note here it asks, does this RFP apply to all or just some of your requests for price quotes? So you could just have a Category 1 RFP, in which case you would select this button if it's going to apply to all of your Category 1 funding requests. Here it says, does it apply to all your Category 2? So if the answer is no, you wouldn't check that box. And an example of when that might occur is that sometimes when you do a cabling project where you want to replace your facilities, your network wiring inside your building, that may be a situation where you do want to have an RFP or supplemental information to inform vendors of exactly what you're looking for. But let's say you're also going to ask for price quotes on access points or switches, then you would just leave that button blank, and then each time you would create a funding year, a Category 2 FRN, you would then have the option to associate that RFP that you've uploaded to one or more, but not all of your funding requests for Category 2, your service requests for Category 2. So for this example, I'm going to go back. We're going to make this an RFP for Category 1, but no RFP for Category 2. Here is where we have both a drop-down menu, which you would follow using the Add New Service Request dark blue button. But they also have a narrative where you can explain exactly what services you're requesting and the location of where those services need to be delivered. Note that if you have disqualification factors, they want you to include them. They make it sound like it's permissive that you may include them, but in other places in the literature for the program, they say, and when I say they, it's the E-rate administrator will tell you that you must list those disqualification criteria. So I do recommend that if you have certain, must-haves that you don't want to consider a bid unless the bid has these specifications or requirements, that you would list that. One of the most common that I do recommend, especially if you don't have an RFP, is that you would write that you reserve the right to reject late bids that are submitted after the 28-day waiting period for the 470 expires. Why do that? Well, there's been a recent audit finding that an applicant who did not state that bids were due within the 28-day waiting period rejected late filed bids and didn't consider them, even though the applicant received the bid before they started doing their bid evaluation. So as a result of that audit finding, we are recommending that you put that reserve the right to reject late bids in as a disqualification factor. By making it permissive, meaning that you reserve the right, but you also, by implication, reserve the right to consider late bids, that gives you the flexibility you may need should you find yourself in a situation where you haven't received any bids and you have to then go out and ask a service provider to submit a bid that would be received after the 470 28-day waiting period ended. I would also put here other disqualification factors might be if you want the vendor to have an office within a certain radius of miles to where you're located. And that might be necessary if you anticipate that you would need the service provider to come and do repairs or be available to provide technical support. So that's another common factor. Another common factor might be that you have to have discounted bills in order to be able to benefit from the E-rate discount funding, meaning that you don't have the money in your budget to pay the full charges that the vendor would bill you for unless they were able to reflect those charges as a credit and then just bill you, the school district or library or school, for the non-discounted amount, the amount not paid by E-rate. So here are, so I would say examples of disqualification factors. Note that you have to write something here. The system won't allow you to proceed without writing something. So that's the example I have for disqualification factors. The other thing is that if you are requesting a service, internet, or a circuit line to a particular location, I would put the building name and address on down here in the narrative, because none of the other information on the form would report that information to the vendor. So the next thing to do is to select Add New Service Request, and you can go back and edit and add to or take away information from that narrative. That narrative, start it and then finish it after you do these drop-down menu choices for your services. So Add New Service Request, this is very different from last year. In an effort to simplify, they have made it new and different, and therefore, just by virtue of being new and different, it's a bit confusing. So most of you are going to start with the first radio button that you're seeking bids for internet or data transmission service. So internet, I think you know, is the service that connects you to the World Wide Web. Data transmission service is if you just need a circuit. So you don't need the internet going through that circuit because you have another arrangement or service provider that's giving you the internet, but you need the data transmission or the circuit itself. And that most commonly is if you need connections between buildings. So you would select I seek bids for internet access or data transmission service, and now it has what's called that progressive menu that it automatically then gives you 4 choices. And this is where I think some of the confusion you may encounter. The first one I think is the most common. So this is if you need a bid for internet as well as the circuit. So you need internet delivered to your building, and you don't care whether it's delivered over fiber or non-fiber. So this would be like a cable modem. This would be a DSL line. This could be basically point-to-point fiber internet service. The key thing here is that you're getting not just the internet, but you're also getting the transport or the transmission circuit. I think option 2 is very uncommon, and that's when you're just buying the internet, but you're taking responsibility to separately purchase a circuit that connects between the internet service providers, what they call their point of presence or where their network facilities are located, and your building. Most of you don't want the responsibility to have 2 separate service providers, one for the circuit and one for internet. So I would say that option 2 is very uncommon. Option 3 is going to be common if you need that circuit between your buildings. So that's like a wide area network arrangement where you have one internet source coming into your network hub, and then you have circuits between your buildings that are used to share that internet between the buildings. So that's going to be a common one. And then building your own network is very uncommon, so much so that no one in South Dakota has used this option. That's really only available if you can't get the service from an existing service provider, or it's so expensive that the thought of paying that charge is so high that it would actually be cheaper or more cost effective to either buy your own network and then run it, or you would have a dark fiber network where the fiber isn't lit and you would then have to buy the equipment and the electronics to light it. So let's go, I'll do an example with the most common and then also for the data transmission. So this is the most common for internet. Notice now it asks two options, and the one option says for internet access and data transmission services, whether offered as a bundled package or offered by one or more service providers, independent services. Honestly, this language here, or offered by one or more service providers as independent services, this to me is very confusing because it sounds to me like this would be like one of those other options, either the internet only option that I said was very uncommon, or it would be like a data transmission service. So I'm going to select that this is going to be, let's go back here. I selected that it's going to be a bid basically for a combination of services. So you're going to get the transport and you're going to get the internet delivered to your building. Here it's going to look like last year's menu. So it wants you to identify how many lines, how many entities are being served. So usually that's going to be either if you're one building district, that's going to be, you would count all of the schools, even though it's one building. So all of your separate LEAs, or if you need more than one line, you would, include those other entities or those other buildings in your calculation of numbers. So here I would put 3 for a one building. This Lawrence School District has 3 different entities, so I'm going to put 3 here. It asks if you want installation, activation, and configuration, and I always recommend you put yes. That's because if there's a non-recurring or one-time charge to set up the service and it's a new service provider, you could then get that charge qualified for E-rate. Here is a drop-down menu for minimum and maximum capacity. The menu is identical, and the ranges here may not be consistent or reflect your true desire of the quantity of bandwidth you want. So the recommendation here is just to select the closest drop-down option, and then this would be a clarification to include in the narrative that if your minimum, let's say your minimum is really 20 megabits, but you only can choose 10 or 25. So I'd recommend go with 25 because 20 is closer to 25 than it is to 10. And then in the narrative, just explain that the minimum you want is actually 20 megs, but that drop-down option wasn't available. So here I'm going to select whatever my minimum or maximum need is. And I do recommend that, especially if you're seeking to enter into a multi-year contract, the maximum range or capacity should consider what the end quantity would be for a multi-year agreement. So if, for example, you currently need, what did I put here, 10 megs, but maybe maybe you're interested in entering into a 3-year agreement, and by the 3rd year, you may need up to 100 megs. Or more common these days is that you would start at a gig, and you may need to go up to 10 gigs. That's a very common request. So when I'm done making all of those choices, then I'm going to choose Save Request. Notice it takes me right back to the narrative so that if there's more information I want to add, I can do that now. Let's do the circuit option. So this would be data transmission service for building-to-building connections. That's going to be the 3rd option. Notice that the word fiber does not show up in the top selection here. It just says data transmission service. But once I select it, now I have to choose 2 different options. I have to choose either the data transmission service without internet, because up here in the first radio button, that's where the combined data transmission service option with internet occurred. Or here it says, I seek to lease capacity, and this is where it mentions lease lit fiber and dark fiber. So remember the special rules for bidding. If you want to buy dark fiber, you have to bid dark fiber and lit fiber. That's what this choice is for. If you just want lit fiber and you aren't interested in dark fiber, then you do select this top button, even though the word fiber doesn't appear anywhere. And in the narrative, you explain that you want fiber. And you are allowed to list as a disqualification factor bids that come that are submitted for data transmission service that aren't based on fiber. That's the recent clarification that we obtained from the FCC. So again, you're going to do your quantity and your minimum and maximum capacity. So let's say I'm going to do 5 and 10 here. I'm going to do the installation, activation, and configuration as a yes. Notice that because at the beginning I told the system that all of my service requests for category 1 will be associated with the RFP document, that's automatically filled in here. And then I'm going to save request. Here is where I would also explain exactly what service you want. So if you only want a fiber-based data transmission service, you would explain that here and state that bids that propose a transmission medium or technology other than lit fiber would be disqualified. Here is where, under the installment payment plan, it's where the system asks you if there is a one-time charge for special construction, meaning the company that proposes to provide you service requires the construction of facilities to build out their network to provide you with the requested service. This is where you are allowed to say, I want an installment payment plan so that I don't have to pay the non-discounted share of that special construction charge all in 1 year. So the program will allow the service provider to get the E-rate discount portion all in 1 year, but you're allowed to up to 4 years to pay the non-discounted share if the service provider is willing to accommodate your request. There's no mandatory requirement for the service provider to agree to this, but this is your opportunity to say, yeah, I want a service, I want a payment plan. And what I usually do here is I usually put 4 and 4 as the number of years that you want to spread your payment over. And here it would be up to you to identify whether you want each payment to be spread over 12 monthly bills, or you want to just pay it as a lump sum each year. So I'm going to put monthly, and I'm going to save and continue. And at that point, I've now done 2 service requests for category 1. Notice that the reason it took me back to category, I could add a new service request if I wanted to request another price quote for category 1. But if I select save and continue, it's now going to take me to category 2 because I indicated at the top of the form, at the beginning of the form, that I also want to request category 2 services and equipment. This is a little different because now you have to select one of the subcategories under category 2. So the first subcategory is equipment, so that's what we call internal connections. The second is for maintenance of internal connections. And then the third is for what's called managed internal broadband services. So this is where you would have a vendor provide you with the service of operating and managing and monitoring your eligible internal connections equipment. So I'll do a demo of each type, and we'll start first with equipment. So we know from the eligible services list that's published each year, which parenthetically the upcoming year's eligible services list has not yet been released by the FCC, but we're expecting it very soon. And it tells us what the different types of equipment are that qualify for E-rate funding, and they're then listed here in this drop-down box. Notice this year the word license is added to all of the components that may have licenses, which is helpful. So that means that you don't have to separately request, do a service request for licenses. So let's say we need some wireless access points. And it says here, and the software and the licenses. Now it asks the quantity. And it also asks for your manufacturer preference if you have one. If you have a manufacturer preference, you can select it from the drop-down or drop-up list. And if the vendor name, the manufacturer name that you want to receive bids on is not listed, then you can go down to the bottom and select other. If you select other, then you would write in the name of the manufacturer, and you would make sure you write the magic words or equivalent. Notice that those magic words or equivalent are already hard-coded in the drop-down box for all of the other manufacturers that they've listed. That's absolutely critical to ensure that you are compliant with the competitive bidding rules, because those rules state that you must consider not only your preferred manufacturer, but also equivalent equipment. So let's say we want, let's go with AirHive. I usually put yes, that I want installation, activation, configuration. And here, because I did not associate the RFP document with all Category 2 requests, I'm now going to have to select which request the RFP is associated with. So for this purpose, let's say there's no RFP, so I'll leave that blank. And then here it asks, what's the quantity? So you have to have some idea of how many you want, so that you vendors know how to bid. And you can put whatever you think you need, let's say 10. Notice here that it now gives you the option to say, yes, I also want maintenance on this equipment. And it automatically populates a service request for maintenance, which is terrific. So here I'm going to say I have 3 entities. I have 3 LEAs under one physical building. They all need some of these access points. And I save the request. I still haven't written anything here, and we'll talk about that for a minute. Notice here the or equivalent language is not required. The system automatically said, well, if you're going to buy AeroHive, then you need maintenance for AeroHive. Okay, and let's now do a cabling bid. Cabling is the only one that's a little bit different. So cabling shows up here. Here, notice that the quantity is the number of feet, so you need to approximate the number of feet of cabling you would need. So I'm going to just do a guesstimate that it's 1,000 feet. And I don't really care which company's cabling is being used. If I have a specification that it needs to be Cat 5 or Cat 6, I'm going to write that in the narrative. Here it asks the number of entities to serve. Are you asking or seeking the installation activation? I write yes. And here I'm going to say yes, I have a 470, I have a RFP for the cabling project. So I select the button, yes, I do, that I check the box that the RFP governs this service request. So here, I'm going to put a little bit more color commentary about this or equivalent. So if you have existing network equipment that the new equipment needs to be interoperable with, you would write that down here. That the bid for alternative or equivalent manufacturer equipment has to be interoperable with our existing AeroHive access points. And you can prescribe that the vendors have to submit technical documentation to prove that their equipment will work interoperably with your existing network equipment without requiring you to buy additional equipment. You can also invite vendors to come and do a site survey. That may be particularly useful for cabling, where they're going to want to observe the type of materials and structure that the building is made out of, and also identify whether the conduit is going to go through the ceiling or be tacked on top of the ceiling, around the perimeter of the ceiling. And also we'll be able to examine exactly the length of the different runs that are required. You can go so far as to state that it's mandatory for the vendor to attend a site walkthrough for cabling, and that the bid is disqualified if they don't. You can also, another example is if you're buying wireless access points and you also want them installed, you are allowed to say that you want a bid that you have to receive the installation price quote as part of the bid to sell you the equipment. In other words, you don't want equipment to be drop shipped to you and then you have to then contract with a separate vendor for the installation. So those are the types of disqualification factors you can put in. And again, the deadline, reserve the right to reject late price quotes or proposals submitted after the 470, what they call the allowable contract date. That date is shown in the E-rate records, and that's the 29th day from the posting date of the 470. And day one is the first day that you posted it. Even if you post it late in the day, just 1 minute before midnight, that still counts as day one. If I'm done all of my service requests, I would then select Save and Continue. And it wants to know, the system's asking, do I have a technical contact that I want vendors to reach out to if they have a question about this 470? Now, that person does not have to be a registered Epic user, but for purposes of record keeping and document retention, I recommend that you select No here, and that you, as the regular 470 contact person, would receive all of the technical questions, and then you would be responsible for working internally to get the answers and communicating that back to the vendor. That way, you would keep track of all of the vendor communications, which is a requirement under the competitive bidding rules as well as under the document retention rules. What you can also do is make the 470 contact and another person responsible for those inquiries and to receive those inquiries, and that can be done in the next section and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So here I'm going to put no. I'm going to save and continue. But in the next screen, it says, are there state or local bidding requirements that apply to this procurement? Here's where I'm going to say yes. A narrative drop-down box appears, and here's where I can prescribe exactly how vendors are supposed to contact me, as well as other bidding procedures. So here's where I would specify that inquiries have to be done, and this is just my recommendation, that you would mandate that inquiries be sent through email so you have a record of them. You could require that they be sent to more than one person, and then you um, can collaborate on the answer. You could also put the exact time and date of the deadline for the bids and make sure that that's not before the 28th, day of the bidding period. And you can say what exact information has to be provided. So do you want a copy of their terms and conditions? Do you want the spec sheet for the equipment? Things like that. What information do you need to be able to make an informed decision and conduct your bid evaluation? So all of this would be in here. I'm just going to make gobbledygook so that we can get through it. And then the next thing is you're pretty much done. So notice up here, the status bar shows us that we're now going to enter the 470 review process. Now here, you're going to select the review button, and the form essentially is now being generated as a PDF. When that process has been completed, a task will show up, and you'll be able to download the draft form that you've completed thus far, be able to review it. If there are edits that you need to make, you'll be able to do that. Now, one of the tricks here is that you can try to refresh the system. Notice that when I clicked on task, the task showed up. So I'm going to select the hyperlink, and there's a second hyperlink here where I can download the document. I download it, I open it up locally on my computer, I look at it, I make sure that the quantities and the descriptions are correct. And if everything looks okay, I would close that, and I would select the box that says I'm certifying that the information is correct. Notice that when I selected that box, checked it, this blue box, continue to certification, became live. If I uncheck the box, that button is dead. Here you have a choice. You can send the form to another user in your Epic profile to certify it, or you can certify it yourself. So if I continue to certification, so let's say everything is good. If it's not good and I need to go back into the form, I use the back button. It will take me back to this page. It will generate an updated link with an updated draft form. I would review it, make sure that it is accurate and complete. When I go to continue to certification, I then have these mandatory certifications. I must check every single box in order for the certify button to go live. Here it's dark blue. If I forget one and I try to certify, it won't let me. I certify the form. It reminds me that if I stated anything false, I could get in trouble. And when I select yes, it means that I understand the statement above, that I could false statements subject me to liability, and represent that I am authorized to make the certifications. I select yes. My form has now been certified, and it's going to show up in 3 places. Number 1, it will show up in your news feed. It hasn't shown up there yet, but it should. Number 2, I'm going to go to my home page, my landing page. I can scroll all the way down. I can look for the 470s I filed for this year. There it shows up. Notice it still says incomplete. We know we certified it. It's the system has not yet updated to recognize that it's been certified. If I select this link, I'm not sure whether the document is going to be available yet. It may say that it's still being generated. Nope, there it is. So I selected, I went to my landing page. I searched by 470 by my funding year. I then went to the summary page and then selected generated documents. And now I have my certified form. All that information is there. There's my certification, and it shows that the certification was done. So here, the allowable contract date does not show up right here, but it would show up, I believe, if you go back to your summary. Let's see, back to your summary, and it's on the summary page. 28 days from today, 29 days from today, counting day 1 being the date that you post the 470, is December 8th. What you'll note when I go to do the demo for the 471 is that I'm not going to use this one because the system will show that I have made an error because I'm trying to rely on a 470 that has not been posted for 28 days. So what I've gone and done for the 471 demos, I've gone back to some of the older forms that we posted last year, and we'll use those forms to then create the records we need to do the demo for the 471. So let me just pause and ask any questions about the 470. Just unmute yourself if you have any questions. And the third way that you'll get the 470 is the contact person will receive an email, and I believe it will either be attached or there'll be a link to the form in the email. And that email will come from Epic. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our landing page. And here it is. It shows that the form has been filed. It takes me to the 470 record and the generated document page. So let's do our 471 demo. 471, so remember I clicked on the hyperlink for the build entity, and unlike the 470, where you're allowed to request quotes on both Category 1 and Category 2, you must file separate 471s for Category 1 and Category 2. The system will prevent you from combining the two. So here's my Category 1 example. So I'm going to put my nickname down again. I'm going to save and continue. I'm going to say I am the contact person. And here it says, well, if you're not around at your main number or email, do you have other information in case we want to contact you over the summer? Here, I usually put my cell phone. or a second person and the person's email address. For this purpose, I'm going to leave it blank because it's an optional field, and I'm going to continue. Here, it looks very similar to the 470, but it asks, do you want category 1 or category 2? If I select category 1, category 2 goes dark. If I select category 2, I can't select category 1. So I'm going to go with category 1 first. And all of this information is hard-coded. So for this district, it's showing that there are 670 students in the district. And if I went into the bin here, which is a hyperlink, I could look at all of the specific entities. But I also can do that in the next screen, where it's showing all of the buildings in this district. Notice here, all of this information has been entered into each of these schools' profiles prior to completing and starting the 471. So this is the data that could be edited now through a couple days before the 471 filing window opens. It's not yet been announced, but we're expecting that the window is going to be pretty close to what it was last year, which would be a starting date of the 15th, which happens to be a Saturday this year in January. So I'm guessing it's either going to be January 14th, which is a Friday, or they'll wait until the following Tuesday, because I think the 17th, that Monday, I believe that that's a holiday. So I think it's going to open sometime between January 14th and January 18th, and it's going to close around March 24th or March 25th. Okay, if this date is all good, then I'm going to save and continue. And for category 1, it's showing me, oh, how did it come up with this count that it's a 70% discount? Well, if I look at my schools that have enrollments and NSLP numbers, it will show me how that number was calculated. So it's showing the total here of 640. It explains here it's allocated between the two schools and the number of NSLP students. And again, this information was entered by someone that associated with this Epic account previously. Okay, so I'm going to save and continue. Now I'm going to start building my 471, and I'm doing that by adding a funding request. So FRN is a funding request number, and it's very similar to the service request, which was from the 470. Now we're actually asking for the funding. So we're going to start by selecting the Add FRN button. First things first, they want you to give it a nickname. So I'm going to say Bundled Internet here. If I knew the service provider, I could put the service provider's name there. And the next question is, it's asking, is this a multi-year FRN, meaning this was a service agreement, a contract that's been in place over multiple years, and you previously applied for E-rate for a prior year of that contract. If you answer yes here, then it wants you to provide the FRN number from 2021 or 2022. You can provide that number, and you can use what's called the Copy FRN feature, which is you can then copy all of that information by FRN and put it into your new funding year 2022. Again, this is an example. We haven't gotten this changed. We're doing a demo on 2021, but this is really a demo for 2022. So you could select by either a 470 number or FRN number, select continue. The system will then import all of the FRN information from the prior year. You would then just need to update that with the correct service start date and the correct service end date. But for this example, let's see what that chat is. modify, we'll talk about that at the end, Janelle. Okay. So is this funding request a continuation? I'm going to say no. And it asks for the service type. There's only one service type for category 1. Then I'm going to select continue. Now it wants to know, am I getting the service through a contract or month to month? Ignore tariff. It's pretty antiquated at this point. You're either going to have a contract, meaning you signed the contract with the service provider, or you're just getting the service month to month. You're billed, and you did not have to sign a contract first. So if it's contract, I'm going to select that. Note now that when I'm building the FRN, it needs to know what the contract number is, the contract record, which I've previously created. So if it's a contract service and you don't have a contract record, what you can do is you can, I don't have the contract yet. You can just simply select contracts and open a new tab, or you can just go directly into contracts from this tab, in which case this incomplete form will show up as a task. So I'll show you what that looks like. Notice that it went right into a task, and the task is going to say complete or finish the 471. Now let's see, I'm going to use the back button, and it's going to take me into contracts. And if I have to add a new contract, I'm going to select manage contracts. I'm going to select add a new contract. Nickname, contract number is optional. It asks if you want to upload a copy of the contract. I recommend doing so because oftentimes PIA will then ask you for the contract if you don't upload it. If I upload it, then I can take it from my system, drag and drop. These, and you can do multiple documents for the contract, and this field is an optional field to describe it. I'm going to leave it blank. Now it's asking, is it a state master contract or a multiple award schedule? And the answer to this is nearly always no. Then asks, can applicants piggyback off this contract, meaning can they use the contract and buy services? Usually no. Or was it created by someone else and you then piggybacked off of their contract? And the answer usually is no. Now it wants to know how many bids did you receive, so that's going to require you to have that information handy. And it wants to know what 470 you used to post the 470 before you entered into the contract. So you need to know how many bids you had. And you can search by 470 number or by bin. If you search by bin, it's going to give you all of the different 470s that have been filed. And you would need to make sure that you use one where you've made sure that you've had 28 days before you entered into the contract. So here, I created one on September 9th, so I can use that because here I bid category 1, and I would need to make sure I bid the internet there for my FRN, but you can go ahead and select that. Account number is an optional field. Here you can have, you may know the 9-digit SPIN or the service provider ID number that the vendor has, or you can search by vendor name, just a few letters. And I happen to know from the training site, they're all start with USAC. So then all of the vendors that might match that name would appear. I'm going to select service provider 2. Obviously, you would need to associate the SPIN with the correct service provider name. And if you're not sure of the SPIN, then you would contact the vendor who submitted the price quote to make sure that you're using the correct SPIN. Save and continue. And here it asks, is it a multi-year contract? and you can say yes. And it wants to know the date that you awarded the contract. So that's the date that you signed, somebody from the applicant signed the contract. So I'm going to make up a date, which is after the 28-day waiting period. And because it's a multi-year contract, the contract award date may well be before this funding year. And does it have voluntary extensions? I'm going to say yes. And it wants to know, well, what's the end date if all the extensions are going to be exercised? And this is going to be a 3-year contract that was signed last year. But this is the first year that we're getting E-rate on it. So I'm going to say that the first year was 2021 to 2, 3, 4, and it's 3 years. So the end date's going to be 2024. There's 2 extensions left because it was 1-year contract. And it wants to know how many extensions, how many months are left on the contract. Well, if I've already used 1 year of it, but I didn't claim E-rate on it in this example, I'm going to have 24 months left, years 2 and 3. Here the answer is always no. There's no statute in South Dakota that requires the price to be kept confidential. Select Save and Continue, review all the information, and then you can select Complete. And now you've got your contract record. Now we'll go back and finish our form. So I'm going to do the search by the organization creating bin, which is for this training site is 120, and that's automatically populated. And now I'm going to look for my contracts. So here's my award date. Let's see. I think I put 2020. This was the one I just did. It said nickname. Notice now I'm not done yet. It now wants to know what's the current term expiration date. Well, it's a 1-year extension. So notice that the system automatically populated July 1st, 2021. When your system opens for the next funding year, that date's going to automatically populate, but it's going to be July 1, 2022. Note, even for internal connections equipment that you may decide to buy prior to July 1st, you should still use the July 1st, 2022 service start date. Here it asks, what's the date that the contract expires for the current term? So I'm going to say, well, it's a 1-year renewal, so it's going to be at the end of the upcoming funding year. And I'm going to continue. Here it asks, are you creating your own network by paying for special construction, or are you going to have a leased dark fiber network? Do you need maintenance with it or network equipment? Unless you are going to be having a network construction incurring that cost, you're going to select no. I'm going to select continue, and now we're getting back to the narrative. So you would need to explain this is bundled internet to remote school, not on state network. That would be an adequate explanation. Now you've built the summary of the funding request, but now you have to itemize the different charges. So you have to itemize the bandwidth levels and the monthly charge. So here you would need to select one of the 4 radio buttons. And for bundled internet, the answer usually is going to be the first radio button, because that's where you've got internet coming from the service provider to your building. Here would be for wide area network circuits, building to building. And here, I don't believe any of you would need to select this. This is something that we sometimes use at the state because we can have a circuit delivered to a hub site, and then it would connect to the network. And internet service without any circuit, I don't know of anyone in the state that uses that option. So again, most of the time it's going to be this one for internet from a service provider's point of presence or what's called their facilities to your building. Or for building to building wide area network connections, it's going to be the second radio button. So this example is going to be internet. And now it wants to know what material or what type of technology is being used to deliver the internet. If you don't know, you would need to ask the service provider. So this would be a good piece of information to require to be included in your request for price quotes. So many of you may need or want fiber, and it then says, well, what's the type of connection? And most of the time for fiber, the choice is going to be Ethernet. Now it wants to know the speeds, and it wants to know download and upload speeds. And this is what's called advertised speeds, meaning it's what the vendor says you can expect to receive or what you can expect the maximum service level to be. So let's put 1, and notice here it says, do you want gigabit or megabit? I'm going to say gigabit. And I'm going to say it's symmetrical, meaning the download and the upload speeds are expected to be the same. And I don't have the option to burst and buy internet above that 1 gig level. Not done yet. It wants to know, is this a direct connection to a single school, library, or a non-instructional facility for internet access? And usually the answer for this is yes for bundled internet, which means that it's not a connection between buildings or a wide area network. If the first question is answered with a yes, usually the second question is answered with a no. The only time it's no and no is if you are buying internet separately. So again, I don't think that applies to anyone in our state. So I'm going to select no, it's not a wide area network, and it does not include firewall service. You may end up buying an internet product where they do offer firewall service. That would be listed in the bid quote. Save and continue. And here's where we would enter the numbers. So this would be from either your existing bill if you're continuing to receive service from the same vendor, or it would be from the price quote or the contract. So let's say for 1 gig of internet, it's $1,000 a month. There are no costs ineligible, and I'm going to get 1 line. And let's say there's an installation charge or activation fee of $129. There's nothing ineligible about it, and it's going to be 1 activation fee. Notice now it has calculated the entire amount of that line item. So I'm going to select Save and Continue. And here it's saying, are all of the entities receiving the service? And the answer is yes, they're all going to share this internet. The answer is no. Then you would need to select exactly which of the entities are receiving the service. So I'm going to say yes. I'm going to save and continue. And I'm going to save and continue because that's all hard-coded. And I finished my first line item. Well, I have some taxes and surcharges that I have to pay. Notice this. It says show help for taxes and USF fees. So let's look at that. And what's it say? To create a single line item for taxes and fees, choose the appropriate purpose, the function miscellaneous, and the type of connection taxes and USF fees. So here we're going to have the same purpose. The function is going to be follow the instructions, miscellaneous. The type of connection is going to be taxes and fees. So whatever the taxes and fees are that are estimated, you would put here. Notice that if I don't have anything for the one-time cost, I still have to put in zeros. The system won't allow me to go through. Save and continue. All of the entities are receiving the service, the taxes and surcharges, so I'm going to select save and continue. Save and continue again. And if that is all I have for my Category 1 funding request, I'm going to hit save and continue again. And here I have the option to add another funding request, or because I'm nearly done, I'm going to review the 471. So let's review the 471. We get the same pop-up box that says they're going to run some validations, and then they're going to create a 471 draft, and it's going to show up as a task. So I'm going to say yes. But instead of it showing up as a task here, I think I misspoke. It doesn't show up as a task. It shows up right here. So we're going to refresh. And we're going to refresh. And there it is. So we're going to go back into the form, download it just like we did for the 471 to make sure that it reflects accurately all of our information. And if it does, then we go on to certification. And if it does not, then we go back to edit form. Once we select the box, it says by checking this box, we're saying the information is correct. Then you can either send it to someone else in your organization to certify using the Send for Certification button, or you can select Continue to Certification. If you select Continue to Certification, you not only need to select all of the boxes. Here, you need to show, well, how much money do I have in my budget for technology that's not being paid for by E-rate? So this is a back of the envelope calculation for all of the other technology expenditures, including staff, that you might have in your budget. So that would include training, software, computers, any kind of electricity upgrades, etc. Here it's saying, are you receiving any of the funds from a service provider? And the answer has to be no. If it's yes, then you can't apply for E-rate because it's a competitive bidding violation. You have to pay your non-discounted share. And it says, has the vendor helped you find money to pay for your non-discounted share? And again, that has to be no. I check all of the boxes, reading them all very carefully. I certify, pop-up box reminder that I can be held liable if I fraudulently request money. I selected yes, I can certify, and now it's showing that the form has been certified. Here it says, please click here to access your certified 470. If you go all the way down, notice that it says there's no 471 documents generated at this time. The system just needs a little bit of time to catch up. A little bit more time. That's just showing the certification. So the other way I can look for my form is going to be down here at the bottom where I'm looking for my 470 ones that were filed for funding year 2021. And I'm looking for one that was certified today, which is right there. And now I'm going to see there's my PDF link for my form, which is going to download and save locally to your system. So that's all there is to filing a 471 for Category 1. Let me just pause here and see if there are any questions about that. Okay, let's go on to Category 2. And look, here's our receipt acknowledgement letter that we got already, which is another copy of the form and another way of getting the form. So we're going to go back to our landing page. We're going to select our build entity hyperlink. We're going to select the ellipse or the ... buttons, and we're going to create a 471 again. And this one is going to be training example C2. Save and continue. This is all going to look familiar. I'm going to be the main contact. This time I'm saying it's Category 2. Category 2, save and continue. Now I'm going to start save and continue. And I'm going to start building my FRM. Note here that it shows, let's go back there. So I want to create a nickname. So we're going to do access points. We're going to say, no, it's not a continuation from last year. And it's asking for the 3 different categories, which category we're purchasing in, where it's internal connections. So we're going to hit continue. Again, we're going to have a contract because all Category 2 purchases do require contracts. So now I've got to go to my contract record and figure out which one it is. And earlier today, I did a contract for access points right there. It asks again, I made the service start date. It's going to be the first day of the funding year. And I am going to make the contract end date 2023, the end of this upcoming funding year. Narrative here is going to be access points. Now I'm going to select Save and Add Manage FRN line items. So now I'm going to, so I built the summary of the funding request. Now I have to itemize the costs. So now it gives me the drop-down menu of all the different types of things. Miscellaneous, again, will be either installation or taxes and charges or training. So here I'm going to select wireless data distribution, and the type of product is going to be access. My make is going to be Arrowhive. My model number I'm going to get from my price quote or contract, right? Whatever the model number is. Here it says, is the installation included in the price? Meaning you don't have a separate charge for installation. If the answer is no, which usually installation is charged separately, you would select no. Here it's saying, are you leasing it as opposed to buying it? And usually the answer there is no. It sometimes is yes if you're doing the managed internal broadband service. But for internal connections, you usually are buying it outright. Notice here, I don't have recurring costs because this is a one-time purchase. So I'm going to put my zeros over here, get that out of the way. And I have to select some kind of unit. And now I'm going to get from my price quote, what's the unit cost? So let's say access point is $900. None of it is ineligible. And let's say I'm going to buy 10. Save and continue. Now it wants to know, are the access points going in both the schools or less, or just one of the schools? And if I select no, then I have to choose which of the schools is getting the access point. In this example, I'm going to say yes. They're both getting some. That doesn't mean that they have to get an even amount. It just means that both of them are getting them. And I recommend that you always select yes, because the system no longer requires you to designate the specific recipients of service of the equipment, because we now have gone to district-wide Category 2 budget. So you don't have to maintain a separate accounting budget for each of your school buildings. You get one budget across the entire district. Save and continue. Save and continue. And if you don't have any taxes or surcharges, which often you may not, then you're done that funding request and you would select save and continue. So let's say we want to do one for managed internal broadbands. So this is a service. And let's say it is continuation from a previous year. We're going to say no because it's a new purchase. Again, if I said yes, then I would want to give them the funding request number. I'm going to say no. And it's asking the service type. Well, this is going to be managed internal broadband services. Remember that I would need to cite to a 470 that requested bids for internal broadband services. If I cite to a 470 that didn't request that service, I'm going to be denied funding for a competitive bidding violation. Here I'm going to say it's contract service. I'm going to search for my contract by my entity name, and I'm going to look to see if I have a MIPS contract, and I do. Right there. And there were no voluntary extensions. But fortunately for me, in my world of make-believe, I'm going to make this a 2-year contract. So the contract began in 2021, but it's not going to end until 2023. I'm going to do my narrative, explanation. That's going to be a sentence or two that just explains this is managed internal broadband connections for certain building. And I'm now going to add my line items. And usually managed service, it's going to be 3 different kinds. So you are going to buy equipment and you're going to lease equipment and it's going to be managed by the service provider. Or you're going to buy new equipment that is purchased from them or another vendor. So the first one is you're leasing equipment from them. The second one is that you are buying equipment either from the MIBS vendor or another vendor. And then the third one is you already have the equipment. It's already been bought and paid for and installed, and they're now just providing the service to manage and monitor the equipment. So whatever the choice is, you would put, that applies. And I really want to emphasize here for a minute that this can only be for equipment that qualifies for E-rate funding. So you can't include in here management and operations of telephone equipment or VoIP equipment or computers or printers, any of the equipment that E-rate doesn't pay for. You can't then try to qualify a service agreement to manage and operate equipment that's ineligible. So it has to be only E-rate eligible internal connections equipment. So let's say you already have the equipment. And so this really is just going to be a service agreement where you don't have the staff, the time to do the management and operation of the equipment. And this typically is going to be a monthly service charge. So let's say it's going to cost you $100 a month, and it's only going to be for eligible equipment. So you can say that there's nothing ineligible, and you're not going to have any one-time costs because you're just paying $100 a month. Then it just wants to know, are all the entities or some of them receiving the service? You say all, and you're done. Now I can tell you that if the contract hasn't been uploaded as part of your contracts module, and the contract doesn't list the equipment that's being managed and operated, you will for certain receive a PIA inquiry saying, give us the list, the make and model of the equipment that this contract covers. Okay, so we're going to continue. And now let's say we have a funding request, and this one is going to be for maintenance, and it's going to be for maintenance of those access points, and it's going to be basically the software updates and TAC, which is the technical assistance. That's the kind of maintenance this is going to be. So I'm going to put TAC and software updates for access points. It's not a continuation from a prior year. And this time I'm going to select maintenance. I'm going to select continue. It is a contract. So I now have to find my contract in my records. Let's see if I have a maintenance contract. There we go. Well, this is for switches. Let's see if I have one for nope. We're going to just use that switch one for purposes of this demo. So again, we have to put the end date, which is going to be the end of the funding year, unless it's a multiple year agreement. So I'm going to put 6/30/2023. I'm going to explain that this is software updates and technical support for access points. Type. And now I'm going to add the FRN. Note that the type of maintenance that I am going to request on this form qualifies for funding without regard to whether you, it is not like the type of maintenance where you contract with a company to come out and perform maintenance like labor maintenance. That type of maintenance you can apply for E-rate on, but you have to show that you've actually used the service each month to be able to qualify to get your disbursement or your E-rate discount funding. So my recommendation is that you would pay for that type of maintenance out of your local budget, and you would use E-rate to pay for this kind of software updates and technical support. So I'm going to add a line item. I am going to list the quantity of the equipment. So in this one, I'm going to say 10 because it's 10 access points. Note that they don't ask any other questions, so it's incumbent for you to either upload the contract when you create the contract record, and the contract specifies the make and model and quantity of the equipment being purchased, the software and technical support is being purchased for, or be prepared to get that information, to get an inquiry from PIA to provide that information. So here I'm going to say it's a one-time fee. And let's say for 10 of them, it's $50 a year. So let's say it's $500. I'm going to add that information in. I'm going to say all the entities are receiving the service. Save and continue. And there's no taxes or surcharges or any other charges, so I'm going to continue, save, and continue. And I've now done my 3 funding requests for Category 2. I've done my access points, my managed internal broadband service, and my maintenance, which is the TAC and software updates. Now I'm going to select the Review 471 button, just like we did for Category 1. And in a moment or two, the hyperlink for the draft 471 PDF is going to appear. I'm going to select refresh because I'm impatient. I select it again and it has shown up. I'm going to click on the hyperlink to download it. I'm going to look at the form, make sure it's all accurate. Any information needs to be changed. I'm going to go back to edit form. If this is correct, then I'm going to continue to certification. I'm going to select all the boxes. Remember, I have to put in how much money I have in my local budget for technology that's not being paid for by E-rate. So whatever I put in for the first application, that number, I would put the same number in here. But because my memory fails me, I'm going to say $20,000. Oh, looks like I might have done that last time. Remember, no help from the service provider to either have them pay for your non-discounted share or even to help you find a source of money to pay for the non-discounted share. So you're going to select no to both of those questions. You're going to continue to check all of the certifications and read them carefully. They typically don't change from year to year. Once I select all of them, the certify button becomes active again. If I forget one, I can't certify. So I'm going to certify. I'm going to look and say, yep, I know if I say something false and I commit fraud, I'm going to get in trouble. And I am agreeing by selecting yes, that I understand the statements above, meaning all the certifications, and I'm authorized to make the certifications. I'm going to select yes. Now, I'm going to wait a minute or two, and I can go to the hyperlink to click to access my 471, and that's the certified version. Or I can check my newsfeed. So I'm going to go first here, and guess what? It's not there yet. The system hasn't caught up. Let's see if it's in the news feed. I think this is the one from 18 minutes ago, so that's not the one yet. So it hasn't shown up there yet. Because I'm super impatient, I'm going to look for it down here and see if it's shown up there. Oh, I put the wrong year there. Let's see. As it showed up. All right. Search by certification date. So now it shows up here. Let's see, and there's the original version. So I've got my PDF there. And if it's there, then it's probably in the news feed. Yep, it's in the news feed. And again, I'm going to get an email as the contact person from Epic with a copy of it as well. So question came up earlier about doing profiles. So I want to address that question first. But first, I am going to stop the recording so that we can have a frank discussion that is not going to inhibit anyone. So let me do that.